Next we can put on our stator plate. We want to lubricate this O-ring with a little engine oil before installing. Just like so. Letters point in a proper reading orientation. Retention bolts coated in a little bit of Loctite. Next is the stator itself. So next we're going to install our stator assembly. Note this recess for your wire to go through. My stator might look different than yours, as this bike has a lighting coil on it, and our pickup goes in place, retained by one socket head cap screw. We want to make sure that all of our wires are tucked nicely out of harm's way. We've got our two stator retention bolts. A little dab of Loctite on there just for good measure. We're going to be torquing these to 9 foot-pounds. And just like the clutch cover and center cases and everything else that uses this type of bolt. And then our stator pickup, we will snug down.
Action.
Our flywheel is next. Flywheel nut. We will not be torquing this down just yet because we don't have a good way to hold it. We're going to go ahead and install our two oil seals on the case side over here, followed by our countershaft sprocket, and then we can torque this down. So now we're going to install our oil seals. I like to add a little bit of engine oil to the lips on those before carefully sliding over our shift shaft. I like to kind of walk it in over the splines, push it back to where it starts to get seated. I'm going to use a socket that's about that same size to just tap it in place. And you want that flush with your case. I'm going to do the same thing on the countershaft seal here. Use a little bit of engine oil to lubricate it. Be very careful navigating over these sharp splines. We're getting it seated. This one, you can go too far. We'll use the same method. Carefully tap that in place. Just so it's flush. At which point, we can now take our sprocket with retaining plate. Apply a little bit of Loctite on our bolts and get that cinched up. Going back to our Motion Pro clutch tool that we learned about earlier, it has pins on the opposite side that fit in this flywheel. That helps us torque this down to 40 foot-pounds. You can also use these same pins to hold the countershaft sprocket. I'm tightening those guys down. Coming down to the end of our engine assembly here, I'm going to put our clutch cover back on with a fresh gasket. This paper gasket isn't the most important, but what it does is it keeps moisture out. So this bike is more of a trail off-road setup. We're going to take it through mud, we're going to take it through water. We want to keep that stator nice and dry. So we'll run our bolts in here, torque this down to 9 foot-pounds, and there's just a couple other things left, and then this engine is ready to go back in the bike. We're going to go ahead and install our vent tube. On this 97 model, the vent tube goes on and just points downward. Later models, it goes up to the intake boot. This shift up kit comes with ports for an oil cooler. Note that it comes with this bridge. This bridge is important because oil comes out of one and needs to go back into the other side. If you own a cylinder like the TB parts cylinder, they just supply bolts. There's a crossover that goes on internally. So if you just add an oil cooler without blocking that crossover on your TB parts cylinder, no oil is going through your oil cooler. When we are ready for an oil cooler, we'll reuse these banjo bolts. Our oil cooler will come with banjo fittings. We'll make a video later on when we add that. But this engine is back together and ready to go in the bike. That'll be next.